I invite Faith Lynch and Annabel Biruete to please come on stage. Thank you for being here. So what I wanted to do as this session, and we don't have any slides to share with you for this, but I wanted to be more of a conversation than anything else. And to me, what was important here is that there are different perspectives. One is an academic center perspective, and how do you approach involving clinicians more in research? And the other one, of course, is from a large professional society. And so I have quite a few different questions that I think we can dive into, but maybe I'll just start off with a general question for both of you. And I think from both your perspective, how do you think we can involve clinicians, and what is the biggest barrier currently in involving clinicians in research and in digital innovation relating topics? And maybe I'll start with you.
I think we spoke about it, time. We see a lot of time constraints. I feel like even though EMRs are getting easier to use, everybody sees that there's more time then, so they just keep adding to your plate. So I feel like time is actually a really big issue, at least where I'm from. So
yeah. I thought it was interesting because I think that topic, when Wisset and when they were talking earlier, they mentioned something about dedicated time. I actually wrote that down.
Yeah, that was very good. I did write that down myself, actually.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. And what do you think?
From the academic standpoint, I think it's exposure. I think a lot of dietitians in training sometimes have not had the opportunity of being involved in research, and sometimes it feels like a big task. And I'm a clinician and not a researcher, and therefore maybe I shouldn't go there. But I can tell from first-hand experience, I had experience in research since I was an undergrad in Mexico, which was not a research institution, but having mentors that were interested in answering questions and just letting the mentees go forward and trying to answer those questions in the way with the access to patients, to resources, whatever was available. So from my academic side points now is increasing the exposure of research to students, starting with the undergrad training.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I assume increasing exposure, but also making sure that there's almost like an easy button, an easy way to get into this activity. I know there was something mentioned about making the approvals for IRBs, for example, and things like that a little bit more straightforward.
Definitely a knowledge gap, especially amongst clinical nurses who don't see it. So if there's no research in the areas that you work, you're not going to see it, so you're not going to know how to pursue it.
Yeah. Let me turn to the next question, and certainly this is something I know we often face, and certainly in the work that we do. How do you get AI out of this, pilot territory, which I think it so often ends up being stuck, and we face this certainly periodically as well ourselves. So I'd love to hear both of your perspective. Maybe I'll start with you this time.
Yes, I think coming from the academic standpoint, I can say that it was a couple of years ago that generative AI came to the classroom, and it has been really challenging because from the beginning, at least at my institution, there was no clear guidance on how to use it and when to use it. So that's how we started, and then we moved to it's up to the instructor to see if we could use. And right now, a lot of the instructors, the professors in our department is hit or miss. It really depends. I think there may be an age gap. So for example, I started my position 3 years ago, and I can say that probably more at the assistant professor level, they're more open to start using AI rather than the established professors that they have their classes set, and they're like, this works, I don't want to add anything else. So kind of like trying to take this back because AI obviously is here to stay. And for us, training the next generation, for me, training the next generations of dietitians is really important that they know the pros, the cons, and how to use it appropriately, particularly. Taking it as we heard, taking it as a help, but not as a replacement of the work that we do is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Faith? What's your perspective on
From
this?
a professional association perspective, we use AI on our learning management system, so that's kind of where we started, and we just developed guidelines because a lot of our members are like, when do we use AI? How do we use it? What's safe to use it? And we have a nephrology nursing journal, so we want to make sure that there's guidelines out there, so for people that don't know how to use AI, they can then look at this and say, oh, I can use this, but I can't use this to write my article that's going to be published, right? Or I can use this, but I have to be transparent that I did use it. So that's kind of where we are from an association perspective.
Yeah, I think transparency in when you use AI for publication or other related
Yes.
things, I think is really, really critical nowadays. I totally agree with you. What do you think, and maybe this is more of a concluding question, but I'll actually ask it now. I think based on what you've heard so far, what do you think are some of the areas, if there's one thing that you can do differently next week? Is there one thing that you've learned so far? Is there one thing that you think you could do differently, both from, again, a large society organization, but also from an academic standpoint? And, I'll change the order a little bit, Faith.
When it comes to AI, is what
Yeah.
you're asking, I do like the protected time that we just heard about, because I saw that and I was like, oh, that's really great, because there's so many nurses that want to do research and they want to use AI, but now you can actually give them that protected time. So that's a start. But that's what I learned today.
Yeah.
From the academic standpoint, I am actually teaching a medical a nutritional pathophysiology class, and next week is renal disease, kidney disease. So actually, Karen gave me an excellent idea of how to use these prompts to show these dietitians in training on how GFR declines over time, and then how we can use the specific scenarios like diabetic kidney disease or hypertension and how GFR declines to those, and perhaps even challenge and prompt about what types of dietary interventions could modify those declines in GFR.
Interesting. There was a lot of conversation, certainly about nutrition today, and
Yep.
Artificial intelligence and large language models. Obviously, when it comes to specifically to AI, there's a lot of safeguards, and I think I know Hanji mentioned this earlier, I think making sure that we are being very thoughtful about what we use ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or other platforms with. What are your thoughts about some of these safeguards, be it, bias checks, clinical validation and other things? And it'll start with you. I'll start with you.
Okay, so I think one of the biggest challenges, so starting with the challenge, is that we have to be critical about what these tools can give clinicians. I will speak for the case of dietitians. Right now, I think the challenge is that in order to build that, they have to have a great nutrition foundation. And I feel, and I've seen that several of our students have used these tools kind of like to get ahead and perhaps not having that good background information. So to me, the biggest challenge is try to just get to a good nutrition foundation and then utilize AI in order to build on that foundation. I don't think it has to be used as a substitute, but as a help. And one of the things that at least I've been dealing with, and I've seen, for example, in LinkedIn, some examples, is that there were, for example, evidence-based practice guidelines for the management of constipation, not in the setting of kidney disease, and a person said that they put it into ChatGPT, and actually the summary was wrong, was exactly the opposite of what the article said. So really being careful about the information that is giving you and being critical, take the time also to read some of the things that you're inputting into.
No, I think makes sense. Faith, what do you think?
I do think that a lot of people use it to cite everything, and you have to be able to, you can ask for the references, which I do tell a lot of my staff and a lot of my members, like, use it, look for the references, make sure you're validating that, and a human always has to look it over. It can't just be, let's just, hope that it's correct, because a lot of times, as we saw today, it's inaccurate.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, and I think actually with some of these nutritional tools that I know Hanji showed a little bit earlier to us, I do think it's very important that these things are first presented to dietitians who have a critical oversight as to what is actually potentially provided to the patient before actually providing it to the patient. Maybe what I'll do next is I think I'm going to, because I do think, I wanted to hear a little bit also, again, specifically from both academic and from the large professional society standpoint. So maybe, Faith, if you don't mind, I'll ask you a few questions,
Sure.
and then I'll do a few questions from an academic center standpoint. So how do you think ANA is integrating AI literacy into your program, and what are some of the continuing education credits, other things that you are potentially thinking about doing from a professional society standpoint?
So like I said, our learning management platform has AI. So when we post a webinar, it pulls key points, and it actually spots where it time checks it. So we're using AI for that, and we're trying to do micro-credentials on AI now moving forward. We're trying to really kind of educate everybody on AI and how you can use it safely moving forward, especially from an association standpoint, because again, you're talking about publications, you're talking about research, and you're talking about education.
Yeah. Do you think ANA or organization like ANA has a role in being almost like this unbiased organization that can check, for example, what maybe others are creating in this space?
Yeah, because I think you have the expert nurses in that association that can actually validate those tools. So I think it's definitely a platform for that.
Yeah. What do you think about, RRI, of course, as we've talked, has kind of a unique role in that we are very interested in advancing research and being able to do this type of work. Do you think there's some opportunities, for example, for organizations like RRI to work with NANA or other professional organizations like this to be able to both on potentially allowing fellowships to maybe somebody who's part of ANA or actually being, using some of the data sources. We have other things that potentially we may have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we represent over 60,000 nephrology nurses, so that's a big bulk of, your clinicians as well. And we're very big on research and nephrology nursing research. We give out grants every year. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars for grants. And definitely, I think there could be a really good partnership because you have access to, the experts in the field as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I also think the ability to, bring people together, and from my perspective, I think it's also extraordinarily valuable and certainly important. So let me maybe, Annabel, I'll kind of mix things up a little bit. I think from an academic standpoint, can you talk a little about some of these IRB fast lanes and other things that I think in an academic care setting are probably easier to set up than maybe in other environments?
I really need to talk with WISIT because our IRB process is definitely not AI-driven yet. So I can tell you that some processes could take like 6 months, 8 months, particularly if doing a clinical research study. So I would love to chat to see if we can implement it from an academic standpoint. Now, I'm coming from an institution that does not have a medical school associated with it. So sometimes doing research in these settings, and particularly in a clinical population like those with kidney disease, they're complicated people, complicated patients. So getting those clinicians involved, and that's why we have to work with medical institutions, in my case, with Indiana University, in order to drive those clinical studies forward. So like I said, I don't think in my institution it's used yet. So I think at least from my institution, it's still more on the AI is here. We're still trying to figure out how to use it, but they're still being very careful. Whereas in Mayo, for example, I think they're being very proactive about it and probably having champions like Dr. Wiston to driving it forward. And I'm not saying that Purdue is bad because actually we have a lot of research in AI, but applied to the clinical side is very different than generating all of these different models.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about, I think it was mentioned earlier, of course, some of the generational gap. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that I think the generational gap does exist a little bit, technology in general, I don't think just AI. How's that been in academia? What do you think, and how have you approached some of this in your setting?
I try to be proactive, but I'm speaking obviously for myself. Last couple of weeks ago, I was at a transplant dietitians at their annual meeting, and there was a great presentation by Drew Helmler, I believe is his name. He's a dietitian in Canada. Whoops, sorry. He's very proactive about using AI as dietitians, and he asked the audience, and I think it was close to 200 dietitians, and only 10% of the dietitians were using currently AI, so that speaks volumes to how are we integrating this. I think one of the ways that we could move this forward, particularly coming from the dietitian's perspective and renal dietitian's perspective, is really to get involved as societies, particularly, for example, the National Kidney Foundation. I know that Dr. Linda Moore is here, so having papers published on best guidelines in order to use both at the clinician side, at the researcher side, and integrating both of those, I think is probably going to move things forward. But also, I think one of the great things that my my department head has done is bring in people that are knowledgeable in AI and educate us on what are the most recent tools, what is the difference between using ChatGPT versus Claude versus Gemini versus any others, what types of uses can we do for the research side, helping us with like the reviews, which take a long time. From the academic side, are there better tools to guide learning processes in our learners or something like that? So trying to integrate it in both to the clinician, to the learning side, to the research side, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think some of the training, even the stuff that I think Hanji and Karen have done earlier, I do think is extraordinarily helpful. Mm-hmm. And I know Peter Kotenko, of course, I've seen him when we did this several years ago for the first time. I do think these are extraordinarily helpful, just showing how to use these tools and at least not being afraid of them completely. Yeah. So I think that's very helpful. I will say I will never forget, 10, 15 years ago, that when we do things with patients and there would be a clinical study, there was always this question, but do they have a cell phone? And nowadays, I actually remember looking up these numbers, what they would be 10, 15 years ago, and I know, of course, it was, 10, 20% back in the day, and now I don't think it hardly is a question for anybody, because I think the time has changed. And I would expect probably something similar on the AI side. You just have to be a lot more, I think, careful. In terms of the curriculum, you mentioned some things relating to AI, of course, in curriculum. Can you talk about this a little bit more? How is it, what are the plans? Maybe a little bit more detail. What do you think is happening at Purdue?
Yeah, I think it is, like I mentioned, the guidance that we have was be very careful with it, then it's up to the instructor to use it. So I really think it depends on the instructor, on the type of classes that they're giving. So I think educating the educators is actually going to be very important, because we are going to be the ones educating the students. And I don't think right now, to this point, there is that infrastructure in order to give us the best way to use it. I think a lot of it is learning on the go, and a lot of the things that I've done in my classroom has been things that I've interacted with. So for example, the project that I was involved with the Renal Research Institute, that helped me also create kind of like assignments for my students so they see the pros, the cons. A lot of the things that we have seen is, for example, the underreporting of nutrients, and that may be just because of the models and the information that is fed into these models that perhaps is not the best data, and that is not a problem of AI, is really a problem of the databases that we currently have. And if we don't have precise information, we cannot give precise information and get precise information from like these tools. So I think it's a lot of moving pieces that are evolving very fast. But because they're moving very fast, we also have to keep moving fast also.
Yeah. Do you think a younger generation of students at Purdue, for example, I assume they have a little bit less fear of AI, or do you think that's not actually the case? And I think there's different angles to this. I think one is just the reliability of what it does. I think the other one is I do think there's this fear of taking over my job, which I certainly often comes up, and I certainly don't think that's at all the case. But how do you think, what are your thoughts there on this topic?
Actually, I asked that question to my students in my class last semester in the spring. It was nutrition through the life cycle. It was like, we're going to use AI just to get you ready and use it and see how you can use it on your favor. And actually, it was a class of 75 students. About 50% was fearful of using AI because they felt like they were cheating. And they were like, I don't really know how to use it. And I think now, because there's been more time available to just play with it, and actually our institution gives free access to some of these paid models, they've been more proactive about using it. But I think they take so many classes, and it's impossible to know in which classes they use it appropriately versus not. You can clearly also see, like in the assignments, this is definitely generated by AI, and you didn't
even emails.
Yeah, because for example, my exams are written because I want to understand their thought process, and then you see their assignments, and it's not the same. No. They're really not proofreading this. So I think there has to be a medium. I feel that sometimes, and I get it, like sometimes you don't have enough time to do all of these assignments, and it's just like, okay, give me a summary of this, input the questions, input the prompts that I already have in the assignment, and then they just submit that. But have to kind of like work backwards also with them in order to create a little bit more critical thinking into these assignments.
Do you think there should be a disclosure at the bottom of every email that I think
You
you
could
used?
tell what's a ChatGPT email and what's not. I mean, it's the same. You got to review it before you send it because it doesn't always make sense either.
Yeah.
So.
I think it would be really impressive if you could say a difference between a ChatGPT email and a Gemini or Claude email. That would be that would be pretty impressive.
But it's true. You can tell that that's ChatGPT. You could just tell. It's very obvious.
Something good is good, but then something fake, I don't know.
Yeah, I think on the other hand, you could probably argue that before calculators were created,
That's
people
true.
knew how to multiply things in their head. I think now it's
And I feel also for
still
some,
doable, but probably a lot more
being
complicated.
at an institution that there's a lot of international students, I mean, I also think that this is a way to make communication clearer.
Yes.
So I also get it from that standpoint. So I don't think it's just like black and white. So.
Yeah. Do you think, Faith, do you think from ANA's perspective, is there some more things that can be done to build a little bit more trust and not to have this fear of AI will take over my job?
Yeah, so we're working on that. We're doing a lot of education. So at our symposiums and our summits, we're bringing in a lot of speakers on AI to kind of like say, hey, these are the pros of AI in nephrology nursing, and this is what you can use AI for. Because I think all of us have a fear, right? In 15 years, are we all going to be, is like they're going to be like a robot taking care of patients and dialyzing them? Like, we don't know what's going to happen. It's not going to happen, but we all think that. But no, I think it's just education right now, and ANA is trying to move AI into the association with chatbots and things like that. So we're a little behind, but we're getting there.
Yeah. I actually think if people get a little more involved in it, and just like I think you've done this work with RI on the nutritional chatbot with Hanji and Peter Katenko, I think that actually builds up some trust in a little more understanding as to what these tools actually do. And of course, these large language models, I think, as was discussed, not all of them are totally black box. I mean, I do think creating these nutritional menus that Hanji demonstrated earlier that's more of a RAG approach. So at least you use some evidence to actually where the answers are coming from, just like we also did this with the manual that was written by Stefano Stewart on hemodiafiltration, for example, where we create these these types of interfaces. Maybe I know we only have less than a minute left, so maybe I'll ask you both if there's anything that you think you would want to mention, your thoughts as we move forward, anything that we can do, both, again, from an academic standpoint, I think when you leave today, any thoughts?
I think AI is so useful as long as you use it appropriately. I mean, it's changing every single day. So what we learn today is going to be different tomorrow. It just keeps progressing in a great way. We just have to use it appropriately.
Yeah.
I think the same way. Is here to stay. Is let's create clear guidance for best approaches. And now on the research side of things, I know that I don't know how many of you are dietitians, but hopefully with the previous talks and this panel, it's just really involved like dietitians in research. I've talked with several of them. Sometimes they don't know how to approach, but they're ready, they're excited, they're interested. So whenever you have the opportunity, hopefully you'll be able to engage also the dietitians.
Yeah, well, thank you both very much. This is extraordinarily helpful. I just want to thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
This is fascinating to hear. So.